Welcome, everybody, to the Lenders Online Training Podcast as part of our ongoing commercial real estate series, Something New. I'm Dave Stauffacher, joined with me, as always, my colleague, Joe Davis. Now, today we're going to talk about something that probably approaches every lender's desk quite often. It's an appraisal. It's that thick thing that we always looked at. The two of us are actually talking today and viewing a little bit later as far as what is actually obtained in that book report that comes to your desk. So I guess the pondering question that I would throw out there and what we're asking today is, of that appraisal, are you actually reviewing the appraisal, or are you just accepting that number that's probably on page 98, 99 at the back of the book? Hi,
Yeah.
Joe.
Hey, Dave, thanks for having me. And that's exactly the right framing, because I've seen this over and over again in my career. I'm sure you have as well. Lenders get that 100-page report that you talked about, flip to the value conclusion, and as long as it works for their loan, they move on, right? Just blindly accepting the appraised value. And that's really where the risk starts creeping in. The lender should never outsource their underwriting to a third party, and that includes the appraiser.
Exactly. And I know I'm kind of one of those that was at fault of that in the earlier years. I felt that, someone else is going to review it. I'm more concerned at applying my discount factor to whatever that number is that he agreed upon. However, the more that I've done this over the years, and especially when I teach with Lenders Online Training, is the appraisal to me is kind of an important input to our credit decision. It's like the other inputs, the financial statements that we look at, the loan applications, the personal financial statements, the credit reports. All that information is input of which we need to digest to come up with a decision. So let's talk about the appraisal today. Most of the appraisals that we will see, commercial appraisals, have three valuation approaches. So what do I mean by that? Well, that's kind of the foundation that we're going to begin with. 3 approaches. And Joe, I know that our audience probably knows those, but I think it's worth investing our time into actually getting into the detail and basically tell something about each one of those approaches.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the 3 approaches, just to kind of level set, make sure everybody's on the same page, are cost, sales comparison, and income. Those are the 3 approaches of commercial appraisals.
Perfect. I want to take the cost approach. It's pretty intuitive, right? It's what would the cost to build this property today? Land, materials, labor, and time. Kind of what it is. My goodness, even the inflationary environment that we have, it costs more money today than it probably did last year. And we knew that during COVID, but during that time, things were significantly higher through inflation on the building materials that went up from 20, 30, 40%, sometimes just on lumber. So this approach most likely goes with new construction, special use properties. We actually had a podcast on special use, single purpose properties. And basically when the markets or comps were kind of limited, we had to deal with one approach, right? So we went with the cost. But there's some limitations, right? Cost does not equal market. Just because something was $5 million to build doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to pay $5 million about it. Remember my hotel situation where in one community, this was the cost, but the value was, far less because they didn't feel the market would cover that cost, despite the fact that it cost that amount of money. If I would have moved that building 30 miles up the road, the market would have paid a lot more from it. So cost does not equal market. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. Next is the sales comparison approach, and I'll take that one.
Okay.
Your comps, right? And this is where things can get a little uncomfortable sometimes, because in many deals, especially rural markets or unique properties, maybe there's some low transaction volume. in these areas and for these property types. So those comps can get really stretched in those situations and probably not as accurate as a more cookie cutter building in a larger area that had a lot more transactions.
It's interesting in those rural markets, and I'm in Wisconsin, so we have a variety of rural markets. There's rural markets in every state, but there are commercial properties in those markets. There are banks in those markets, so they do lend on those properties. So they have to have some understanding of value as to what we would lend on that, and the comps are very, very limited. So they're kind of limited to their comparability, right? What are we comparing it to? What about the income approach, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about the income approach. And this is really the bread and butter of commercial real estate lending, the income approach. So you start with rental income, you subtract out expenses, and you arrive at your NOI. NOI stands for net operating income. You apply a cap rate, a capitalization rate, and we have some material on capitalization rates as well if folks want to go and review that. You apply that cap rate, and that gives you value. And for most income producing CRE, this is really the primary driver of value. It's the method that carries the most weight for the buyers, the sellers, and also for us as bankers.
Joe, you did mention the fact that we have our commercial real estate series that talked about cap rates and appraisals. We did a little podcast on cap rates, specifically on somewhat of the confusion of how they're determined, how they can impact someone's rate, right? What would for example, do you got an example as to what would happen on these cap rates if it changes? What happens?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and a small change can really matter a lot with a cap rate. Let's run a very basic example. Let's say your NOI, your net operating income, is $500,000. If you apply an 8% cap rate, that translates into a value of $6.25 million. Okay, let's do a 9% cap rate, same property. That translates then into a value of $5.55 million. So that's a $700,000 swing from just that one assumption change. And lenders will just scrutinize DSCR down to decimals. We'll spend hours looking at cash flow and running cash flow scenarios, stress testing them, and then looking at projections. But sometimes we'll just go ahead and accept that cap rate without much pushback. And I think that can be a real trap.
It's interesting when we're talking about cap rates, and we often will do sensitivity analysis of looking at what our cash flow would be if interest rates went up a little bit higher, or if they went down. Does it break even? And we do focus significantly on the cash flow coverage, yet we have very little discussions on the actual value of the collateral that we've already, we need to have that, but we don't take in consideration what rates would be to those properties as well, right?
Yeah, really good point. I mean, interest rates drive cap rates. So while we're stress testing interest rates on our cash flow, it is natural to also stress test the cap rates and what that does to the value of your collateral in both a rising and a falling rate environment.
So these appraisers, they go through these three approaches. They somehow reconcile them to come up with a number, right? We have to have a number. Can't have a range. It's a little bit of this. You have to have a number, and everybody focuses on that number. So I think what's interesting from my perspective, and I get a little analytical on this, is, all right, why is this approach weighted more heavily than the other approach? Somehow he or she made the decision to weight that to come up with that number. And don't get me going on the commercial, the residential ones, those appraisal values, those get confusing to me as well. And it comes out to being just that number that almost was the same number that someone bought the house for. Anyway.
Funny how that works.
Oh my goodness. But I've learned so much about it. All right, so let's move on to something slightly different. This gets into valuation types. Now we're talking about as is. We're talking about as complete. We're talking about as stabilized. What do they mean?
Yeah, really good point. let's start with as is, and that's exactly what it sounds like. What is it worth today? Just the property as it sits. No projections, no assumptions about improvements. Just what is it? What is its value today? This is your floor value. Indeed, it might just be a piece of land if you're talking about a construction project. So it's also the value you care about the most if something goes wrong early. Say in the construction process, you want to know how much that as is value is, so you can rely on that at the start of your process.
Okay, as is, the floor. Okay, I get that. Now, as complete, all right, so as complete comes into play generally with our construction properties, right? Some type of renovation. So they kind of started with the floor. You're funding the project, and the real question is, all right, I'm giving you money to improve the property. What actually is it going to go to with all the money that I've given to you? What is it actually worth in the future, right? We're trying to forecast the future. And I think it's important for us as lenders to know what we're lending, knowing what we're giving. Is the value going to still be there? Because once we've committed to it, right, it's kind of ours, right? The end up value is we're kind of stuck with. We have to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So right. So an example, right? If it's a $4 million loan, but the appraisal said, when it's done, it's going to be $5 million. So, okay, the lateral, I mean, if you look at the loan to value, it's 80%. It assumes that everything's finished on time. And it assumes that the budget holds and that market conditions don't shift. Now, those are a lot of ifs. And I've been around a long time. You've been around a long time. I don't know. I don't recall the last project that I was in that actually came in with budget, within budget parameters. There was always something overrun, and never less. For some reason, it was never less. So that's the confusing side, but we deal with it as complete. What about stabilized? What does that mean?
Yeah, as stabilized. Now this is where things get really interesting and also where things get risky. As stabilized assumes full construction, target occupancy at market rents with normalized expenses. Okay. So in other words, it assumes the business plan works. It assumes the projections will hold. And that's really what we're talking about with an as stabilized value.
So it's like nirvana, the perfect thing, where it probably would mean the most highest value of the property. Everything is perfect. Everything came in line. And that's the highest we can think of, right? Probably the most attractive, probably the most subjective, right? There's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah, agree. A lot of subjectivity. And this is really, if I was only going to spend time on one area of an appraisal, it's the assumptions. And the as stabilized value has a lot of assumptions because they're trying to look in a crystal ball and look into the future. And that's not anything I'm too excited about lending on.
So what are some of the guidelines that we would think about when we're dealing with an appraisal, dealing with the appraiser? Looking at it is probably one of the fundamentals is we need to maintain some independence, right? We have to really be thorough, understand if we're dealing with an approved appraiser, is that there needs to be independence from the ownership of the property, ownership of the construction. Everything needs, this is truly a third party. Regulators are going to expect it. We want to make sure there's no influence on that value. There's no pressure or bias as to what we need that value. It kind of comes into the whole discussion where, can you appraise that property? I got to get 500,000 for it. I mean, those discussions have happened in the old days. I know they have. Yeah. Not by me. What about that, Joe?
Yeah, I agree. And independence is now a requirement with the recent appraisal. Well, not recent now, 16 years ago, recent appraisal regulations. But independence doesn't mean passivity, right? You can be independent and ask questions. And in fact, I would encourage it.
So true, so true. And I think what that makes us lead into, we've talked about the guidelines of our colleagues, the banks that we deal with, check your guidelines. Every institution should probably have an appraisal policy, right? Have an approved appraiser list who they feel comfortable with. I know that if you're dealing with SBA loans, they have approved list of SBA appraisers that they feel comfortable with. And I would say those procedures probably need to be defined a little bit and reviewed on a consistent basis to make sure that, yeah, we're following it too, that whatever we're requesting is coming back and it meets our guidelines, it has the independence, and we feel comfortable to the best that we can what that value is.
Yeah, really, really good points, David. And I would just add, as part of your review process, you ideally have a separate reviewer. Maybe it's someone in credit or loan review or another officer, just someone not directly involved with the deal. And I say that for two reasons. One is independence, as you point out, but the other is objectivity. They don't have a dog in the fight. They're going to be more objective about the appraisal and be able to point out any issues with it.
Okay. So we talked about independence importance. We talked about having a defined review process. I think a good thing is to challenge assumptions. This is where when we talked about asking questions to the appraisers, I think this is where, well, separates lenders from each other. Those that have been experienced, that are good, that understand the industry can say, you know what, let's talk about the examples, the assumptions, because we'll do the same thing we're doing when we're doing financial projections. These assumptions are the basis to the output that we're looking for. So rent assumptions. What does market rents be? Are they aggressive? Are they not aggressive? What about vacancy? Is it reasonably low? Does it compare to what the market, where that information is as to where the market vacancies, where that data point is? Do the expenses look reasonable? Do they look maybe lighter than normal? Are there not any repairs and maintenance or ongoing so-called CapEx for these properties? I think that's the important that we need to ask questions and feel comfortable with that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, agree. It's asking those questions. It's things like, what data supports these rents? Why is vacancy below the market average? What comps validate this? Or how is the cap rate determined? Those are all good questions. And also, I caught an arithmetic error in an appraisal once that swung the value $300,000.
Oh my.
And the appraiser was just embarrassed as can be, you can imagine, but it happens. They're people. So I'm not saying you necessarily have to get out the calculator on every single deal, but it's part of the review process that you can't always trust the math, unfortunately. But you don't need the appraiser to change anything necessarily, and a lot of them are very hesitant to do that. But what you're doing is demonstrating that you are looking at these things, demonstrating that you're reviewing them, and also you're gaining an understanding of the valuation and any risk points that are involved as well. So that appraisal review process is just really key.
I think what's interesting with that is, and I think some of the bigger organizations, or if you start to have an individual that does that reviews appraisals, that they keep kind of their own database, whether it's data based on existing appraisals that they've received over a time, and they have their own database to reflect upon, to look at prior assumptions from maybe another appraisal. You start to put all these things together and you become well-rounded as to understanding how someone would determine a value on it. Yes, valuations are very subjective, right? It's what your analyst or analytical view is, what mine is. And we still may come close, but we're most likely not going to be exact, correct?
Yeah, really good point. And I would also say document everything. My old famous phrase, paper the file. But don't forget that documentation. Every question, every clarification, every interaction, it needs to be recorded. Put that in the file. People are going to be looking for it.
I know regulators are going to be looking for it. And quite honestly, when you're giving it to your reviewers, you're documenting your thought process. It's your opinion. And, they may disagree with it. They may choose not to do the deal, but it has nothing to do with that's your opinion. You had your basis of why you came up with that. So you're not going to be wrong on that. So I love that. And I will say that all throughout Lenders Online training, document, 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 just for your own support. But I think it's just a process. The better we get at it, say we made judgment on this based on this input. This is the source of my input, and I feel comfortable with that, whether we eventually agree to do the deal or not. So here's another good point that I think what we've mentioned before. I think you need to manage your appraiser list. So what do I mean by that? I think, you have to set expectations, what you want from your appraisers, what specifications that they have to be knowledgeable of. And I would go one step further. Just because an appraiser is on your list does not mean that that appraiser will always be on your list. Sometimes things change over time, and if they go a different way, then it behooves them to be reviewed again. But just because you have an approved list that you had 5 years ago may not be the same list you would want this year. I think experience has changed. Thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, agree. And I was always on the lookout for new appraisers because some of the markets I loaned money in were very small and didn't have a lot of appraisers covering that. So I would always be on the lookout for new ones. On the flip side, though, sometimes you have to remove appraisers from your approved list. And I've done just that for poor quality work, repeated errors, or missing deadlines, for example. Because timelines, they absolutely matter, but quality really matters more. And that's the main thing that I was looking for.
Awesome. All right, Joe, let's bring this home. There's one thing that we can take away from today. I think it's, don't get confused that this 100-page paper, book report, dissertation, that means it's a low-risk deal. It's information in there we need to be aware of. We need to read it. We need to understand that. Just because the abundance of paper doesn't necessarily justify that we're still going to do the deal. The appraiser gives you a lot of information, but it's our job. It's your job. Understand it, challenge it, and apply it to your credit decision, just like we would do for any financial reports if we received a compilation, a review, or an audit. It's our job to understand it, challenge it, because it's important to our credit decision.
Yeah, I agree. And always remember, never outsource your underwriting to anyone. Review it, question it, document it.
So I think our discussion hits home today. Now, whether you're working through a deal, you've looked at the appraiser, or now you will be looking at the appraisal, we appreciate that. Those are the things that we can help you with. Lenders Online training, we have training programs, we have webinars, we have our Ask the Experts platform where you can ask questions to us. Check us out at Lenders Online Training. It's where we like to say we bring deals, real questions. We think that we enhance your professional development. We want you to be the best at what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've got a commercial real estate question you want us to tackle, send it in. We love getting good questions.
We love it. And as we always say, stay grounded, stay curious, and we'll see you the next time at the Lenders Online Training Podcast. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.